Welcome to Indianomics. Countries around the world have been on their edge after the series of threats by US President Donald Trump to impose tariffs on almost all countries. So far, of course, only one set of 10% tariffs have actually become applicable on Chinese imports into the US. However, President Trump has threatened reciprocal tariffs to be announced very soon. Many world leaders have been making a beeline to meet the president to strike bargains. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also meeting President Trump this week in Washington. Will many of these tariffs actually be imposed? Are Indian imports more in danger of getting targeted since India's tariffs are seen as high and our imports are probably dispensable for the United States? What's the impact on inflation, rates, growth for the world in general? I have with me Professor Praveen Krishna, the well-known expert in international trade from the Johns Hopkins Institute at Baltimore. Professor Praveen Krishna, thank you very much indeed for your time. Very kind of you to sit up for us. I want to begin by asking, what's in your sense the expectation? Will tariffs actually go through, especially on India, simply because it might mean inflation to the United States as well?
No, these are excellent questions, and at this stage, it's very hard to actually say with any degree of confidence what will actually happen. As you've seen and you've already indicated through the campaign, and since President Trump got elected and since he's assumed office, we've seen a variety of different announcements, from uniform tariffs on all goods and all countries to very large tariffs on China, to even replacing all of U.S. income taxes with trade taxes, and now steel and aluminum tariffs and so on. So it's very hard to determine what part of this is simply some kind of a threat to maybe increase U.S. leverage in negotiations over trade or something else that the Trump administration seeks. How much of this is really even intended as maybe some kind of a distraction, as some are suggesting, from the various other domestic policy issues that the administration is aggressively pursuing, and how serious they are about actually implementing these to achieve the kinds of things that they promised during the campaign. And in particular, as you know, President Trump campaigned on sort of "Make America Great Again" slogan, which really was in part about resurrecting manufacturing in the US, increasing manufacturing growth, increasing manufacturing employment, and so forth. And if that's a serious goal, or if that remains a serious goal, then I think we could say with some confidence that this administration sees tariffs as being central, kind of an important instrument to try and achieve that. Okay. On your question about inflation, it is undoubtedly going to be the case that any tariffs imposed by the US, especially the large tariffs that are not absorbed by the exporters, these will result in cost increases in intermediate inputs like steel and aluminum, like we're probably going to see very soon, and on final goods like automobiles and so on. And so there's an inflationary impact that we will see for sure. All of this is coming in a context in which inflation's already been a big problem in the US and indeed a big problem around the world. And so it's for that reason as well, it's a bit unclear how vigorously the administration will pursue a policy that is very likely to inflate, to create inflation in the domestic economy here and elsewhere.
Yeah, you know, throughout the campaign, the cry was for a 60% import tariff on anything Chinese. But what actually has come to be 10%. So can we therefore assume that even with India, it may be more, bargaining to make India buy more military equipment from the United States, or something more specific, rather than force India to reduce all tariffs?
I think this is yet to be seen, what exactly the intentions are with respect to India. I think we'll know probably very soon, given that Prime Minister Modi is going to be in Washington, D.C. very quickly. But I could say one thing, that in addition to kind of military sales and so forth, there's a number of commercial interests in the U.S. that would like to sell more to India. This could be on the agricultural side. This could be, people from farmers from Seattle wanting to sell more apples to India, walnuts to India. There's an interest in selling more medical devices and so on and so forth. So there's a number of sectors in the U.S. that have a clear, direct commercial interest of motorcycles something that's already been discussed, and the Indians have already reduced tariffs on motorcycles for that reason. So I wouldn't say that this is exclusively sort of military sales. This could be part of a broader discussion that the U.S. would like to have with India.
Okay, so it's possible that I've just culled out the duties on agricultural products, and on most of the fresh fruit and vegetable, India has a 30% tariff, as well on some nuts like walnuts, as you say. Chances are, and even milk and milk products is about 30%. So do you think that there is a very good likelihood we may have to reduce tariffs on these?
That too is yet to be seen, because as my understanding is that the agricultural sector, the dairy sector, these are sensitive sectors for India.
Yes.
And so reducing tariffs in agriculture would be a greater challenge given India's own politics and India's own economics relative to maybe a tariff on motorcycles. And so I'm not sure that it would be that easy for India to do. I'm sure there's some appreciation on the American side about the political economy of India and the challenges that India faces in achieving any liberalization of this sort. So whatever happens will, of course, be if this is the main issue and if this is the sort of thing that the U.S. Seeks to achieve. I think there's at least some understanding on both sides of the challenges in achieving sort of drastic reductions in let's say, in agriculture or in other goods. So I can't imagine that you would go from a 30% to a zero or 100% to a zero or something like that. But maybe some reductions in some sectors selectively. Maybe there's some phase-in that could be negotiated where the tariffs aren't reduced immediately, but phased in over a small period of time, 5 years, 2 years, whatever the case might be.
Okay. All right. So maybe 30 to 20 or something like that. You have spent a large part of your academic life looking at these trade patterns. What is your sense, like, say, 1 year or 2 years down the line? Are you going to see a general increase in tariffs everywhere because of reciprocity? Or do you think that the world will negotiate its way out? Your best guess.
Yeah. My sense is the world will negotiate its way out of this. That's certainly my hope. And I hope that is realized. The one thing I'll say, which I think your audiences might benefit from hearing from, is that, the last round of very significant tariffs that Donald Trump imposed, so this was, 2017, 2018, including very significant tariffs on China of average of maybe 20, 25, 30%. At that stage, there was a great worry that this would very substantially affect the global economy, that would very substantially affect international patterns of trade and so forth. And somewhat to everybody's surprise, it's turned out that it actually reoriented trade a little bit, but not a whole lot, right? So you would have noticed that despite all of this, all of the kind of the U.S.-China trade war in place and the very high tariffs imposed by the U.S. against China in place, that Chinese manufacturing exports actually grew by about 40% between 2018 and 2023. And just last year, this was widely reported in
Yes.
January this year, the Chinese recorded $1 trillion trade surplus. So this is despite all of these tariffs being put in place, right? The point I'm making is that in the context of international trade, provided these tariffs are kind of within some reasonable range of 20, 15, 20, 30%, there are ways in which countries kind of find their way around it. The Chinese have sort of set up plants in Vietnam, they export goods to the US through Vietnam and so on and so forth. So there are ways in which trade finds its way around some of these regulations. Of course, if you had a much larger increase in tariffs, so we're talking about 50, 60, 70, 100%, something like that, which I do not expect and don't anticipate at all. But if you had tariff barriers of that sort, then things might get really difficult. But my personal sense is that we will find a way that some of this may just be threats to achieve market access and openness in other countries from the American side, and then countries, just like India's already done in some sense,
Okay.
will look hard at their own tariff structures and see what they could liberalize and what they could offer up in exchange for access to the U.S. market.
Okay. In 2018-19, it was also noted by several brokerages and banks that overall global investment came down because of the uncertainty. Businessmen don't know where to invest and whether to invest. Is there a danger of global growth receding for the next couple of years?
For sure. I mean, we cannot have this type of chaos and uncertainty and arbitrariness and not expect to see some sort of impact on investment, some sort of impact on output. So for sure, I do worry that if this kind of continues for very long periods of time, kind of new announcements each day, new attacks against one country or the other, then it's going to create that atmosphere of uncertainty, replicating or maybe even worsening what you just mentioned happened earlier in the 2018-2019 period, and that's certainly something we do not want to see.
Okay, you know, the big positive that India sees from this entire tariff war is that we may be preferred over China. And actually, one of my colleagues' interview with the congressman, Republican, who heads the India caucus, is also that we would like India to produce things where US is not competitive with China. You see that as a very big opportunity for India?
I think it's an opportunity. How big an opportunity it is or it turns out to be will really depend very significantly on India itself, meaning how good is our business environment, how easy do we make it for investments or investors to redirect from China to India and so forth. So far, meaning following the 2018-2019 tariffs, I think that hope we had that hope in, following 2018-2019 tariffs, and I think that wasn't quite realized to the extent that maybe it could have been, right? So a very big part of this is dependent upon how private businesses see India as a productive place in which to invest, and taking the risks of China into account, finally take the decision that they want to move away from China towards India. I think a lot of that depends on what we do. I think one of the things I would add here is that the challenge of the moment is to find some common ground between India's own goals with respect to growth, with respect to manufacturing, with respect to exports, with respect to employment growth and so forth, in a sense that's represented by Prime Minister Modi's kind of Make in India program. How to find the common ground between that and the Trump administration's own campaign promise of MAGA, Make America Great Again, resurrecting the manufacturing sector. One possible avenue here and where we could benefit is to think creatively about ways in which American investment, American exports of capital, of intermediate inputs and so on, could plug into our own goals, meaning PLI, production linked incentives programs and so on. There could be things that we could be doing here creatively, meaning between the US and India, where American goals of manufacturing and increasing the manufacturing exports are met simultaneously with our own goals of expanding our footprint in the world of manufacturing exports. So I think that that's possible. I think it's possible for us to step into areas that China might be vacating, or where investors may be seeking this kind of China plus one option. A large part, again, depends on how we handle our end of this business.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Dr. Praveen Krishna, it was a pleasure having you with us. Well, with that, it's a break on Bazaar. After that, it'll be time for Chartbusters.